All right, what's going on, everyone? So today we're going to be talking through a Russian infantry assault in Ukraine. This footage just came out a couple days ago. It appears to be recent from what I can tell, but I thought it was worth showcasing today because it kind of gives you an idea of how this war is actually being fought day in and day out in the trenches. This is going to be a group of Russian infantry storming Ukrainian trenches. We've got the helmet cam view here, and it's just, we don't often get a full recording from this point of view, actually showing the assault start to finish. And in this case, it looks like it wasn't actually planned to go like this, and not entirely sure if the tree line they end up assaulting was their actual objective, but it's what they end up taking on. Now you can see that these are kind of the turtle tank type vehicles that we've seen recently, modified armor, modified personnel carriers, if you will. You can see the attached armor, aftermarket armor right there on the side of that vehicle as it peels off, and the drone cage over the top. When I first saw this, I thought that was probably a drone strike, but as you get out, we're going to see that the ground here is just completely littered with anti-tank mines. So again, this vehicle not designed to carry, an entire squad worth of infantry, but this is kind of how Russia has modified a lot of their BMPs, BTRs, even some older tanks to serve as troop transports for this exact purpose, right? To be able to move infantry forwards into that position. Although again, I think they probably had to dismount early here. Looks like that wasn't. There you go. They threw a track, so it looks like they clearly hit a probably a mine. Again, just given the density of the mines that we kind of see scattered throughout the background here. There you go. Look at that. Any one of those could have done, all those mines scattered throughout could have done the trick on this. I think it's BMP, actually. And we're going to come back to that. So I do believe this is BMP. It's hard to tell with all the added stuff on top of this, right? But that's going to be important here in a second, because I do think we actually see throughout this video the crew exit as well. Now you might say, yeah, it's stationary, it's stuck, they can't do anything with it. There's still a main gun, 30 millimeter main gun on the BMP that right now appears to be trained on the position that these forces are going to assault. And as this video goes forward, I don't think we see it participating in this fight at all, which is interesting. And there's arguments for and against. Generally speaking, you would want that firepower to try to support troops on the assault, but it's also stationary, becomes a relatively easy target. However, in this case, it doesn't look like we see anything, right? We're not seeing Ukrainian drones impact around this vehicle. There's maybe a little bit of artillery later. I guess they could be concerned, and rightfully so, about ATGMs or anti-tank guided missiles. This would make a very easy target for that, or any drones overhead. But either way, it does appear that Russia's giving up kind of their biggest asset here, needing to conduct the assault in some way, shape, or form, right? That's where they're going. But leaving that main gun without anybody in there to provide any support by fire is interesting. Now, a little bit of barbed wire here. I understand how this doesn't look like much. Technically speaking, it can still serve a purpose. It can slow people down a little bit. But one strand it's mostly for show, honestly. By and large, we were using mostly triple strand, is the kind that'll kind of keep people from being able to just jump over it like that. But depending on where you are, the people you have, and the resources available, one might be all you have. And this position that we're looking at here looks to be a pretty hastily dug fighting position. We have seen trenches on both sides throughout this conflict that are very well established, right? Like, I wouldn't want to be there, wouldn't want to call it home, wouldn't want to fight out of those conditions, not by a long shot, but it looks relatively comfortable. Not this. Throughout this entire raid, there's going to be a lot of pieces that kind of suggest that this was hastily dug fighting position. I mean, it's, for starters, it appears to be a tree line kind of out in the middle of a field. They're cut off, no clear route to or from, and no easy way to get engineering equipment in there to really reinforce this. We see a lot of the trees that have been knocked down are still sitting inside of the trenches. As these guys move through the trenches, you'll see that at least shoulder up, maybe even waist up at times, is entirely exposed to the outside. Given the opportunity, of course, you don't want that. You'd want to be able to move through the trenches without exposing any portion of your body at all. Now, one thing of note here is with any of these trench systems, you can see how it's not clear how you go down, like what the layout is actually going to be, and they all vary to a degree. Now, when you're looking at a set-piece operation, as an example, look back on D-Day in World War II, right? The troops storming the beach knew their objectives, and they knew they had to hit, objective 1, it was a pillbox, and they cleared it and moved east 2 kilometers, and there were 3 more fortified positions they had to take out. So they would have maybe memorized that to a degree. It's not the case in the war in Ukraine. I mean, maybe from time to time there can be some degree of memorizing the layouts of these trenches, but by and large, you're talking about hasty assaults, kind of day in and day out, hitting new positions. Maybe they would have had the opportunity. The right move, of course, would have been to look at some overhead imagery and kind of get an idea of what this trench system looks like, and maybe even have it with them on the ground. But realistically, the challenge with trench warfare, and there you go, you can see how shallow the trench is. The challenge is, one of the major challenges here is you're kind of learning the trench as you go, the twists and turns and where the actual bunkers are, the fortified positions. Again, a proper recon could provide some of that information, but I'm not seeing anybody in this clip pull up screens, not seeing any radios to talk with people in the rear or drones overhead to get an idea of where they're moving. So it is a little bit, to a degree, like you're fighting blind. Now, that said, what we're seeing from these guys here does appear to be relatively professional. We have seen, at times throughout this war, soldiers on both sides enter the fight that really look like they don't know what they're doing. Maybe holding a weapon for the first time, even to that extreme. That's not what we're seeing here. You're seeing guys, there you go, handing off grenades from one to the next. You'll see them swapping out magazines later. There's a lot of support by fire. You tend to see them relatively spread out, like in a safe manner throughout the trenches. They're not piled one on top of another. They've done this before, right? And I also want to point out, you can hear the guys breathing throughout the helmet cam on this. Anytime I'm not yapping, you can actually hear him breathing. It's pretty calm. Considering the guys in a life or death combat scenario, I think it's safe to say that everybody in this video has done this before, probably quite a few times. Now we do see him bounce around a little bit here. Again, this kind of gives you an idea. You've got this split off different directions for the trenches. It's hard to tell exactly where you're going. And one thing that I did notice about this point in the video is it's not clear where the defensive position really is, right? These are infantry trenches at this point with limited fields of view out to be able to cover anything approaching from any direction. Of course, they had all those landmines, but where is the thing that's holding the front, right? Where's the crew-served weapon? It's got to be here at some point, right? Or a position to some sort of observation position, anything. At this point, it looks just like an infantry trench, which we have seen utilized by both sides in this war. And it just means that they're going to get hammered out there with very little ability to actually fight back when a well-resourced assault, like this one, a little bit, comes into their position. I would note that we haven't really seen the other vehicle. I feel like at the start of this video, there were 2 vehicles rolling side by side up to this assault. The second one peeled off. I don't know. I would have thought maybe some sort of support by fire. Maybe they peeled around to the other side. We don't. This is, an overhead view could be beneficial in that sense. But all in, you're talking about probably, what do you think we've seen at this point? 6 to 8 soldiers. So probably like a squad size element. There you go. You look at some of that overhead cover here. There's just not much. So this is. But trench warfare is trench warfare. It's nasty no matter what. But there are some portions of trenches. They're going to be a lot deeper, a lot more well-fortified, more fighting positions throughout. God, look at that guy. See, just as he's walking, at least his waist and above is entirely exposed. Now, in spring or summer, might be some more leaves on these trees if they're not all dead. I guess it would provide a little bit more cover, but realistically, these guys are just out there in the open. So this is maybe another just good example that these guys have clearly done this a couple times. Where he's got the extra magazine stacked on his back. They're all going in pretty light. Just, we tend to see that in a lot of these operations. They're not going into these trenches expecting, they're not taking supplies in for like a 2 or 3 day operation, right? They're going in with just what is on their kit, and even then it's pretty minimal. Which, brings up a good point here. It feels very much like a cage match of sorts, right? I don't know how they're going to get out of there. This isn't even intended as a knock against Russia. Like, we generally have not seen a lot of Russian evacuations take place from the line of contact. historically, even accounts from their own soldiers and drone footage overhead, they tend to leave their guys there once they're wounded or significantly in the fight, and maybe they'll reinforce them. So these Russian soldiers moving to the trench, they either win this fight and survive, and who knows what comes next at that point, or of course they're killed by the Ukrainians defending it. Now, it does look like they're still a ways away from maybe the core, the heart of this trench system. They're slinging these grenades, still 20, 25, 30 meters away across what does appear to be relatively open terrain. I mean, that's a good launch for a grenade. They're heavier than people think. Actually, they're not all that easy to throw long distance, although the Russian grenades are a little bit lighter than American grenades. I will say throughout this entire clip, we don't really see much in terms of Ukrainian forces returning fire. Not entirely clear why that is or what the situation is from that perspective. It also doesn't appear that there's any sort of artillery, mortar, or drones overhead conducting strikes against these Russians as they're moving forward. There's one point in the video where an artillery round appeared to impact nearby. No way to know for sure if that was Russian or Ukrainian. In either situation, this would be very, very risky for either side to call in artillery. But it doesn't appear, by and large, we're not hearing the cracking of rounds go by the Russians. We're not seeing rounds impact on the ground as they run by. We do come back to a dugout here that it looks like they're trying to figure out if it's actually clear or not. I think they're pretty confident that it is because they're standing right in front of that open door. And they do end up pulling out a flashlight and kind of looking in here. And this is the one part of the video that I did have to clip out because there's a series of dead Ukrainian soldiers inside there. And I know YouTube wouldn't like that and would take the video down. So this was maybe the defense of the trench line. Ended up being this group that maybe their last stand was from inside of this little living quarters style dugout. And it's not entirely clear how this all wraps up. I mean, we have to assume that the Russian survived because we have this helmet cam footage, but it does just kind of abruptly end while they're in this dugout that Ukrainian forces were holed up in at some point. But either way, I thought this video was worth showcasing just to give you an idea of how these trench fights are playing out day in and day out across the front in Ukraine.